All right, welcome back. This is Study Sesh 4. We're going to be doing Lesson 7, Inference Questions. Like the arguments attached to resolve explain questions, most inference arguments are not written in a familiar conclusion supported by premises. They will be passages to be headed somewhere. And the test writers will ask you to find a piece of info that either must be true based on the information provided in the argument or will be by the argument. That something can come from anywhere in the passage and doesn't have to come from anything important. Here are a few tips right off the bat. You can't use any information that is included in the passage. You are a robot. You don't have to find the main conclusion, and you have to pay very close attention to any qualifying language. Most, always, each, few, and might. These guys are going to be super important. That is used. Information to work. Let's go. So, first off, we're going to read the question first. If the following statements above are true, then which one of the following must also be true? Must also be true. Must. Okay. So we've read our question. Artists have different ways of producing contours and hatching. An analysis of these stylistic features can help to distinguish works by famous artists both from forgeries and from works genuinely by other artists. Indeed, this analysis has shown that many of the drawings formerly attributed to Michelangelo are actually by the artist Giulio Clovio, Michelangelo's contemporary. So after reading it, primary thoughts is that, all right, we can decipher techniques to determine forgeries and differences in painters. And they give us an example of how Giulio Clovio had a difference from Michelangelo. So moving on. Contours and hatching are the main features that distinguish the drawing styles of different artists. No, it doesn't say that, but it's an interesting idea. Many of the drawings formerly attributed to Michelangelo are forgeries. No, it just said that they were from his contemporary, so we can get rid of that. No forgery can be perfectly duplicate the contour and hatching styles of a famous artist. So can distinguish works by famous artists from both forgeries and from works genuinely by other artists. That's close. I'm a little unsure. I haven't read this question yet. The contour and hatching styles used to identify the drawings of Clovio cited can be shown to be features of all of Clovio's work. That follows with everything else. It uses the information, and the drawing of Clovio cited can be shown to be far. There is an analyzable difference between Clovio's contour and hatching styles and those of Michelangelo. That is also. So now, upon closer inspection of these guys, I don't think these are nearly as strong as the last two. D, I'm going to remove, though, because all. So that's another strong word. So I'm going to go with my answer choice for E. I don't know if it's correct. Let's see. Here's how to crack it. Assess the question. So we did that. We went for the question first. If the statements above are true, then which of the following must also be true? You're looking for something that an absolutely 100% airtight logical consequence in the argument, which, as you can see in this case, is more like the short descriptive passage. Must. Sometimes on inference questions, there isn't a lot of analysis you can do. In those cases, just read the passage and do a quick paraphrase of the information given. We did that. Most often, these passages are not arguments, though when they are, you will still have to treat all the parts as true and not look for gaps in the reasoning. Sometimes there are a series of statements that appear to be begging to be put together. Look at the passage again. Artists have different ways of producing contours and hatching. An analysis of these stylistic features can help to distinguish works by famous artists from forgeries and from works genuinely by other artists. So that's our first area. Indeed, this analysis has shown that many of the drawings formerly attributed to Michelangelo are actually those by the artist Giulio Clovio, Michelangelo's contemporary. Second chunk. Focus on the facts. Analysis of certain stylistic features can help distinguish which artist is. This analysis helped to show that some art is Clovio's instead of Michelangelo's. An inference is something you can prove from the information given. It is not to be confused with an assumption, which doesn't need proof. Once you have paraphrased the facts, look to see how you know to be true on the basis of them. If you notice a logical progression leading to a particular conclusion, it always pays to go ahead and combine the facts for yourself before you do POE. So what do you know for sure about the facts above? Artistic features are more different enough that they can be used to help identify who made the art. Since the analysis was used to differentiate between Clovio's work and Michelangelo's, there must be some differences between Clovio's style and Michelangelo's style. Step 3. Act. These conclusions are very likely to figure into the right answer somehow, which is why you should bother to paraphrase the passage and look for them in the first place. Response or answer is the statement that is best supported by the passage. This is a reading question 101. Step, look at the choices with an open mind. Predict exactly what inference will be in the test writers will make an inference by just taking a small logical step away from something said in the passage. Take each choice on its own merits and always go back to the passage for proof. So, A, the contours and hatching are the main features that distinguish the drawing styles of the different artists. The passage mentions contours and hatchings as examples of stylistic features, but it does not claim that these are the main features that distinguish artists' works. This choice is more specific and more demanding than our original, so eliminate the choice. They're two styles. They're not all the styles. Many of the drawings formerly attributed to Michelangelo are actually forgeries. A forgery is a fake meant to be passed off as an original work of art. Many Michelangelo works have been attributed to Clovio, but there is no proof in the passage that these works were forgeries. You should eliminate this choice. No forgery can perfectly duplicate the contour and hatching styles of the famous artists. The passage states that stylistic differences help to distinguish works, which is not the same as claiming that no forgery can perfectly duplicate an artist's style. This goes too far, so eliminate it. It was too strong. I said that. The contour and hatching styles used to identify the drawing that Clovio cited can be shown to be features of all of Clovio's works. There is no evidence in the passage that all of Clovio's works have the same style features. Be careful not to make an assumption here. All you know for sure is that the stylistic features are unique, and the styles of Clovio and Michelangelo are a realizable difference between Clovio's contour and hatching styles and those of Michelangelo. Here, at last, is the inference we came up with in the first place. Because the analysis of contour and hatching style is a discernible difference. This is the choice you. So let's look at this little arguments technique that they have here. Do you remember the process of elimination techniques used to cross off wrong answer choices and main point questions? If something in an answer choice that wasn't mentioned in the argument, there's no way you could have inferred it from the information presented. However, when it comes to inference, some of the answers in the previous examples, it is much easier to say that something is usually true than to say that something is. Back up the second phrase. Take a look at another example. Most literature professors are skilled readers. 2. There's only one as the word all, yet there is a vast difference between the two statements. Certainly anyone who has reached such a high position has done more than her fair share of reading. Interesting choice of pronoun. I would assume be demonstrates a ton of reading. It's reasonable to think that if someone's doing that much reading, he or she is probably a skilled reader. But if you were, it would be incredibly difficult to prove that all literature professors are skilled readers. It would only take one person who never really liked to read, but was driven to this level of success for other reasons to disprove the second statement. It would be much easier to prove the first statement because it leaves a lot more room for a few exceptions to the general rule. Both statements involve strong wording, but the second is too. Let's have a look at the following chart. All right, let's look at this chart and we'll go down it. Safely vague. Might, could, may, can, some, possibly, usually, sometimes, at least once, frequently. Dangerously extreme. Always, never, at no time, must, will, all, not, positively, absolutely, unequivocally, every. The sample inference question you just worked through asked you to find the answer choice that could be properly inferred, in other words, the one that must be true based on the information in the argument. Other inference questions will require a slightly different task. Rather than finding the answer that must be true, you will be asked to find the one that would be best supported by the information in the argument. This may seem like a subtle difference, but it is important to pay attention to nuances in language such as this on the LSAT. Let's take a look at how these work. So we're going to be dealing with some of this info kind of vague now. So we're at a new argument. Let's go to the question first. Which of the following statements is most strongly supported by the information? Most strongly supported. inference, and it's the most strongly supported. Coffee and tea contain methylxanthines, which cause temporary increase in the natural production of vasopressin, a hormone produced by the pituitary gland. All right, first chunk. Vasopressin causing clumping of blood cells, and the clumping is more pronounced in women than in men. Interesting. This is probably the explanation for the fact that women face as much of as a tenfold higher risk than men do of complications following angioplasty, a technique used to clear clogged arteries. All right. So what is our general idea here? We have two things. Coffee and tea cause vasopressin. Vasopressin causing then we have two. Vasopressin causes clumping, and that causes danger for, it causes strokes in the mind. And then we have a little bit of a surgical leap here. If you're dealing with a clogged artery, this fact that women faces, this is probably the explanation of the fact that women face as much as a tenfold higher increase than men do of complications following angioplasty, a technique used to clear clogged arteries. Why? Maybe because they drink more tea and coffee. Maybe that's what it's going for here. Which of the following statements is most strongly supported by the information above? Men, but not women, should be given methylxanthines prior to undergoing angioplasty. That's wrong. That's bad. That makes everything worse. In spite of the risk, angioplasty is the only effective treatment for clogged arteries. It gave us no info on clogged arteries. Women probably drink more coffee and tea on average than do men. What? That's exactly what I just said. I did not read the question beforehand. Prior to undergoing angioplasty, women should avoid coffee and tea. Well, that's probably good, but doesn't really say anything. I mean, angioplasty should not be used to treat clogged arteries. No, that's way off. So prior to undergoing, I'm still, that seems, like a likely thing, but I want to say that this is the bigger port here of the suppression. Okay. Here's how to crack it. Step 1, assess the question. Make sure that you're clear about your task. Notice that the question stem makes no mention of an argument. That's a classic sign that this is an inference question. This question asks us to find the answer that is most strongly supported by the information in the passage. You don't have to be able to show that the answer must be true according to the information we have from the author. You will need evidence, but it doesn't have to be true. Analyze the argument. You still need to read the passage carefully. This step will be the same as it was with your first inference question. Pay close attention to qualifying language, underlining keywords and jotting down any notes. To summarize, a substance in coffee and tea increases vasopressin, which in turn causes clumping of blood cells. The clumping is more pronounced in women than in men and may explain why there's a higher risk of. Remember that on inference questions, you can't predict with any assurance that these test writers will look for. Head right to the answer. All right, so check out each answer choice in turn and see which ones you can eliminate. Be on the lookout for answers that fall outside the scope of information that you've been given or are inconsistent with what you were told. The language and answers that are unwarranted comparison. Methylxanthine angioplasty. What do you know from the passage? Methylxanthines cause an increase, which causes blood cell clumping. Clumping can lead to complications, so it would be bad to give men this drug. So we're going to get rid of that one. And we did. B, in spite of the risk of angioplasty, is the only effective treatment of clogged arteries. Well, it used strong wording. The passage doesn't provide information to say that angioplasty is the only effective treatment for clogged arteries. Only makes this choice extreme and unsupported. Get rid of it. Women probably drink more coffee and tea on average than do men. You may be tempted by this at first, since women are at greater risk for complications than men, but there is no support in the passage that the reason the women drink more coffee. All you know for sure is that clumping is more pronounced for women than for men, but not why. Get rid of this one. So I screwed up on this question. That's okay. I gotta learn too. I made an assumption on an inference question, and that's what I did wrong there. Prior to undergoing angioplasty, women should avoid coffee and tea. What do you know from the passage? Because consuming methylxanthines, keep this one for now. That was the obvious one, and I looked too far into it. E, angioplasty should not be used to treat clogged arteries. This goes too far. Though the passage mentions complications of angioplasty, that not enough to claim that treatment. There you have it. You found D, which is the credited response. Notice that you can't say for sure that women should avoid coffee and tea before angioplasty, but this is a reasonable inference from the given facts. In summary, when you have this kind of weaker inference, you have a little bit more latitude. You still need evidence from the passage to support the choice, but you don't have to be able to show that an answer must be true. Arguments technique. Watch out for the word support. The word support shows up in two different types of argument questions, and you'll need to be able to keep them straight if you hope to approach the questions effectively. Take a look at a couple of example questions. Which of the following, if true, provides the most support for the argument? The passage provides the most support for which one of the following? If you're not careful, you might mistakenly think that these two questions ask you to perform the same task. After all, they both talk about support, right? Actually, you have two different tasks here, and if you get them mixed up, you're going to have a difficult time with POE. Examine the first question more closely. Here it is again. Which of the following, if true, provides the most support for an argument? This should be familiar. Care to guess what your task is here? If you identified this as a strengthening question, bravo. There are two indicators that this will help you to properly identify it. First, notice the phrase if true, referring to following, and recall that this is the answers on the strengthening questions that are hypothetically true. Second, notice that if you are being asked to find the answer choices that provide the most support for the argument, in other words, you're being asked to evaluate the impact that each answer choice has on the author's conclusion. Sound familiar? We hope so. Here's the second question. The passage provides the most support for which of the following? Notice the difference here. Aside from the obvious lack of words, if true, this question also asks for the support to happen, but in the other direction. Here you're asked to find the answer choice that is best supported by the passage. That's what you were just doing in the question you worked on a minute ago. So this is an inference question. Here, eliminate answers that aren't relevant because the passage doesn't offer enough evidence to support them. A pretty different mode of elimination from the use of strengthening questions. The words if true when referring to choices indicate hypotheticals and answers, so it won't be an inference question. Got a couple more. Two things to look for. If the answer choices are being used to support the argument, you have to strengthen the question. If the passage is being used to support one of the answer choices, you have to question. Arguments technique. Look for conditional statements and find the contrapositive. Do you know what an if-then statement is? If you've taken any classes in logic, you might know it is a conditional statement. Actually, it's very simple. Read the sentence. If you hit a glass with a hammer, the glass will break. Across a statement such as this, you can diagram it. A common way to diagram statements is to use a symbol for each element in the statement. Here we'll use H for hitting the glass, with a B with a hammer, and B for breaking. And so you use an original statement. This statement would seem reasonable to most people because it's what you expect in the real world. On the LSAT, you would have to take this statement as true if it were part of an argument. You have to accept all the evidence presented in arguments at face value. This is true even when there are things that aren't necessarily making reasonable sense. With inference questions, you are often asked to identify another statement in the form of an answer choice. That also must be true if the statements in the argument are accepted as true. Here's the original statement. If you hit a glass with a hammer, the glass will break. You can come up with a few other statements that you think would have also be true. For example, you could say, if the glass is broken, it was hit with a hammer. You would symbolize this was B with H. That would seem like a reasonable outcome, but can you say that it must be true given our original statement? Not necessarily. The glass could have been thrown out the window and stepped on by a giraffe, shot up by the Red Ryder BB gun, and so on. If this were an answer choice on an inference question in which the argument contained our original statement, what would you do? Hopefully you would cross it out because it doesn't have to be true. You could also suppose that. If you don't hit the glass with a hammer, the glass won't break. In this case, your symbolization would come out. Negation H goes to negation B. Once again, this seems reasonable in many cases, but does it have to be true? Again, not necessarily. Could have been thrown out the window, run over by a car, shattered by an opera singer's high and our original statement do. Hopefully you would cross it out too, because the last one, it doesn't have to be true. How about this statement? If the glass isn't broken, it wasn't hit with the hammer. This would be symbolized as negative B goes to negative H. It makes sense if you think about it, because you know that for sure if you hit the hammer, you're definitely going to break the glass. So if you come across an unbroken glass, there's no way it could have been hit with a hammer, at least not if you accept that the truth of the original statement and the way the truth of if you can't do it on the LSAT. This statement, which must always be true given the original statement is true, is known as the contrapositive. To create the contrapositive of a statement, take the original statement, or a symbolization, which is easier to work with, and perform the following 2 steps. Flip the order, and then negate both of them. So let's diagram that. They had H go to B, and they had 2 steps. Step 1, step 2. Step 1 was we're going to flip B to H, and right now that's wrong. But now we're going to negate B and go to negated H. And now that is our contrapositive. So OG and our contrapositive CP. Oh, look at that. They did it for us. Here's how it works with our original. HB, flip the order, negative B, negative H. Oh, and now we've got another example. If Pablo attends the dance, Christina won't attend the dance. You can symbolize this as follows. P goes to negative C. How do you negate negative C? Well, 2 negatives make a positive. When you get negative step like Christina won't attend the dance, it becomes Christina will attend the dance, positive of your original statement. With these examples are tied in real life and make reasonable sense, it might seem as if it's why the other statements would be. And it would be pretty reasonable to do that if you understand the way conditionals and contrapositives work, and the original statement makes sense. If only the LSAT were always that straightforward. Instead, what will often happen is the original statement will be some abstract and complicated notion that's hard to get a handle on. For instance, you might see a condition that's the alloy. Not nearly as intuitive, is it? Add to that the pressure of taking a time standardized exam, and you'll wish you had memorized the simple symbols above. These steps always work, so it's worth having them at your disposal. We're telling you all this because sometimes arguments contain if-then statements like the ones above. Usually the LSAT writers then ask an inference question that requires you to find the answer that must be true. A couple of answer choices will seem like reasonable things to believe. Another 1 or 2 may be variations on the original conditional statement, but won't be valid contrapositives. It's possible that the credited response may just actually be the contrapositive. That depends on how complicated the argument is and how many pieces of information the passage contains. But regardless, knowing how to derive the contrapositive will help you eliminate wrong choices. Having both the original and contrapositive statements makes it easier to see the difference about what is definitely true and what merely could be true. Arguments technique. Look for little things that mean a lot. Another key to cracking inference questions is to pay close attention to detail. Inferences are often made around seemingly innocuous words or phrases. For instance, anytime you see a term of quantity, comparison, or frequency, odds are it contains an inference. Statement. Most people like Picasso. Inference. Some people may not like Picasso. Statement. Unlike her jacket, mine is real leather. Inference. Her jacket is not real leather. Statement. Russ almost never shows up on time. Inference. Russ rarely or occasionally does show up on time. Keep an eye out for details and you'll stand a better chance of getting inference questions right. Summary. Cracking inference questions. With inference questions, read the argument carefully and pay close attention to details such as qualifying languages. Once you're at the answer choices, your goal is to eliminate the 4 answer choices that don't have to be true or are not wholly supported by evidence provided in the argument. You're going to be looking out for relevance and especially issues of extreme language. The way inference questions are phrased can be very tricky. See the sample question phrasing column in the chart below for some examples. So here are some sample question phrasings on the side. Which of the following statements can be validly inferred from the information above? If the statements are true, then which of the following must also be true? Which of the following conclusions can be validly drawn from the passage above? Which of the following conclusions is best supported by the passage above? All right. Even though this, we have there's a lot of little text right here. Even though the stems in these questions contain the term conclusions, they are not main point questions. Main point questions ask you to find the conclusion, whereas inference questions ask you for a conclusion, one of many that could possibly derive from the passage. They are inference questions, not main point questions. For contrast, review the main point question phrasings on page 29. All right, that was cracking inference questions. So that's going to be stream 2 for today. Thanks, guys. Bye.